Welcome back to Third Phase of Moon. Blake Cousins here. We've got a special report for you today. There's a lot of questions that's going around in astronomy and high academia in regards to the question, are we alone in the universe? Well, recently there's been a new project known as the Galileo, and they're inclined to possibly find something that could change human history overnight. And we've got the man himself, Avi Loeb, the founder, science professor at Harvard, has been groundbreaking in regards to the Oumuamua and other things, but now we're getting into something of new territory, new language. From what I hear you say in some of the recent guest appearances that you've had, you're calling it something like astronomy archaeology?
Thank you for having me. Yes, I call it space archaeology because, in the past 70 years, we've been searching for radio signals from space, and that's equivalent to trying to have a phone conversation. But you need the counterpart to be active for that. And it's possible that nobody is transmitting as we listen. And a much better approach is archaeology, where you search for relics that were produced by others that may not be around anymore. Maybe their star died by now and they perished, but you can find a package in your mailbox even if the sender is not alive.
It's interesting because the whole idea of what you're trying to do is create technology to find relics from ancient technology. And there's this big net that has been around for years in this academia. You're saying that the net's too wide, we're not catching the fish. Now you're trying to tighten up the net in regards to capture something on these telescopes. So tell me a little bit about the goal of Galileo, the Galileo Project.
Right. So the name Galileo is, of course, reflecting our admiration of Galileo Galilei, who tried to find an answer to the question of whether the Earth moves around the sun or vice versa by looking through his telescope. And the philosophers at the time refused to look through his telescope. They said they know that the sun moves around the Earth, and they put him in house arrest. Now, if those philosophers would try to design a space mission, that spacecraft would never reach its destination because it would have the wrong ideas about the location of celestial objects relative to Earth. And nobody remembers those philosophers now. Reality is whatever it is. And so the Galileo Project aims to find the answers by looking through telescopes. The question of whether we are the smartest kid on our cosmic block is not a philosophical question. It's a question to which we can find the answer by looking at the sky. And there were two intriguing pieces of evidence recently. In October 2017, the Pan-STARRS telescope on Haleakala Mountain in Maui, Hawaii.
Haleakala. Go ahead.
Yes. Discovered the first object from outside the solar system that came close to Earth. And it was given the name Oumuamua, which means a scout in the Hawaiian language. And of course, astronomers thought it may be a comet. But it didn't look like a comet. There was no cometary tail of gas or dust around it. And then they said, okay, well, maybe it's an asteroid, just a rock. But then this object, as it was tumbling every 8 hours, the amount of sunlight reflected from it changed by a factor of 10, meaning that it has a very extreme shape. And moreover, the most likely shape was that of a pancake, flat shape, which was very unusual. And then the object exhibited an excess push away from the sun that could not be explained by the rocket effect from outgassing, like a comet has. And so the only explanation that I could think of is that the object is very thin and it's pushed by reflecting sunlight. And the same telescope, Pan-STARRS, a year ago, in September 2020, discovered another object which shared the qualities of Oumuamua. It was pushed away from the sun by reflecting sunlight and had no cometary tail, was given the name 2020 SO, turned out to be a rocket booster that was launched from Earth in 1966. So we know that this one, 2020 SO, was produced artificially by us. The question is, who produced Oumuamua. So that was one intriguing object. And then in June 2021, this year, the Director of National Intelligence in the US delivered a report to Congress saying that there are objects in the sky whose nature is unclear, that military personnel identified, and they were detected by multiple instruments. And according to the head of NASA, Bill Nelson, this is a serious matter. He saw the classified information substantiating these claims. And he said that scientists should get engaged. So the Galileo Project is aiming to identify the nature of objects like Oumuamua or like these unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, that were included in the report to Congress, and use telescopes to figure them out. And one way to do that is by getting a high-resolution image, because they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. In my case, a picture is worth 66,000 words, the number of words in my book, Extraterrestrial, that I wrote earlier this year. I wouldn't have needed to write this book if we had a high-resolution image of Oumuamua or of these unidentified aerial phenomena.
You know, this is where it all, this is where it begins, Avi, because, you know, we have a large following, and the big question in regards to all of this is basically that photograph that you're talking about, an image that's undeniable. So this is where things get a little tricky. So I'm going to go down this road with you a little bit, because it's all about transparency. Transparency will equal disclosure, in my opinion. Is there a protocol if you so happen to capture a video from a telescope or a photograph of an undeniable object that seems intelligent, like you say, nuts and bolts, you could press the buttons. We know that this isn't a rock or anything like this. This is extraterrestrial in nature, or something that's been around in our solar system for a while. How would you release this to the public? Would there be any delay of this information?
Not at all. What we will do is make our data open and the analysis transparent, the way science is done. And that's a big distinction relative to the data owned by government, because that data is mostly classified because it was collected by classified sensors. We don't have that limitation because we buy off-the-shelf instrumentation. And in fact, the first telescope system will be assembled on the roof of the Harvard College Observatory in the coming months. And once it's operational, we'll make copies of it and distribute them in various locations and collect data that will be open. The only delay would come from getting the data and making sure that it's reliable. That takes sometimes a few weeks to months. But then we will release it so anyone can analyze it just like we do. And, you know, if there are objects of non-natural origin, non-human origin, that would have dramatic implications. And we don't need more than one object of this type. It may be a mixed bag. Maybe unidentified aerial phenomena include a lot of human-made objects and natural objects. But the point is, even if one fish happens to be unusual and we catch it in our fishing net, that would have dramatic consequences. And, you know, 70 years ago, Enrico Fermi, a famous physicist, raised the question, where is everybody? He talked with colleagues about extraterrestrials. And as far as I'm concerned, this is not the right question. The right question is, if we imagine others like us, simply because we now know that half of the stars like the sun have a planet the size of the Earth, roughly at the same separation. And we know that most of these stars formed billions of years before the sun. So it's quite reasonable to assume that something like us existed before us 1 billion years ago. And let's just search without prejudice. So given that, what Enrico Fermi should have asked is, how do we fund the search such that we will find evidence for equipment from other civilizations? So it's really a practical matter, and you cannot ask for extraordinary evidence unless you put extraordinary funds to search. That's the mistake often made by the scientific community, saying, oh, the evidence is not extraordinary, therefore we should not engage in this search. Well, if we didn't invest $1 billion in the search for gravitational waves, we wouldn't have found them. And if we didn't invest $10 billion in the Large Hadron Collider, we wouldn't find the Higgs boson. And we searched also for other new particles, supersymmetric particles, we haven't found them. So if we are investing billions of dollars in searching for things we don't know exist, then I would think that investing similar amounts of money in the search for equipment from other civilizations would make a lot of sense. And we should not ask for extraordinary evidence before we put these funds forward.
You know, it's interesting that you bring up basically the idea of this historian and asking the wrong questions, but I think we're here to ask the right questions. And one of them, again, is this transparency of the information and the ramifications. So let me ask you straight up, Avi, if you did discover an object, would you be concerned about releasing it to the public, causing a paradigm shift? Are you prepared for that? And would this not possibly implicate national security? If we did bring forth this evidence, or you did with the Galileo Project, national security might come in and go, hey, look, this is going to change the paradigm shift. We might not be prepared to release this to the public. So you're saying this isn't anything to do with national security if you were indeed to find a craft in our solar system? And would you release it, without, because again, you're not connected to the government, right? Zero?
No, we shy away from classified data because that would limit our ability to speak freely. If indeed it's of extraterrestrial origin, it's not a matter of national security. It's an international matter for the entirety of humanity. And that's the way science deals with information, right? Because it serves all humans to know the reality that we live in. For example, when there was a debate about whether to allow for operations on the human body, some people argue that anatomy should be forbidden because the human body has a soul. And gladly, scientists did not listen to the argument that the human body should not be operated, because once we understood what's inside, we could repair it. And we could understand, for example, how to develop mRNA vaccines to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so it's clear that a better understanding of reality serves humanity as a whole, because the science applies to reality as a whole. It doesn't distinguish nations. And therefore, I think this subject, if indeed the equipment we find was not produced by humans, is not a matter of national security. And we better understand the reality we live in as soon as we can, because that will allow us to adjust to it and operate accordingly. Now, my general philosophy in terms of the Galileo Project is that we should be passive spectators at first. We should not engage. If we do find sophisticated equipment, it may be operated by artificial intelligence systems, most likely not by biological creatures, because they cannot survive long journeys across interstellar distances. So in order to interpret AI systems that were produced by others, we might need our own AI systems, just like we rely on our kids to interpret content we find on the internet because they're more computer savvy. And so the first step is to collect as much data as possible about what information this equipment is seeking, and then how does it respond to what we do? Before we do anything in terms of engaging with it, the real difficult question, tough question, is who will represent us if we decide to engage, and what to do once we figure out that this equipment is intelligent and it's looking at us. And that is very difficult. There is no policy at the moment no protocol as how to respond to that and which organization would represent humanity. And the real concern that I have is that even if we establish some organization or committee that will make decisions, there would still be people somewhere that will take action to their own hands. And that could be quite risky if you think about the consequences of engaging with such equipment. Excellent questions, by the way.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Got some more for you.
No, I mean, they are original because I had a lot of interviews and you are getting to the point.
Well, here's the next one because, we've been in ufology. Well, I'm not sure if you've been in it for just about the past 3 years, because I'm sure bringing up the book Extraterrestrial, writing the book and saying that Oumuamua could be a derelict spacecraft from another civilization, interstellar. Now you're in search for, proof. Again, there's concerns that government has not told us what's really going on in regards to the phenomenon. There's been, seems in our community that would they ever tell us if there was some kind of evidence of disclosure? Are you concerned at all that if you did find something that they might have an issue with it? Again, bringing up national security, because you understand the implications of what would happen if you had that photograph around the world. Are we ready for it? And there would be an underlying concern by the public, no doubt about it.
Yeah, my view of government is different. The way I see it is a lot of the data was collected by classified sensors, which are used for the purpose of monitoring the sky and looking for threats to the US. And the government is very slow in releasing such data because it would reveal the type of sensors that it owns. And because the sensors are classified, the data itself is also classified. That's my understanding. And moreover, the government is split. There are so many sections within government that don't speak to each other. They don't know about the data that other sections are getting. And so the government is somewhat disorganized in this fashion. And as a result of that, it doesn't have the competence of a scientific community that looks at open data. And so I don't think the government is capable of conspiracies because it's split into so many sections. I think it's very much, it could be incompetent in dealing with such data in the sense that it didn't analyze it well enough. It doesn't really know what it means. And it was buried, in some drawers of bureaucrats. And in some clumsy way, it didn't make itself to the scientific research that it deserves. And as a result, the Galileo Project is a breath of fresh air in that regard, because we will use the very best instrumentation that we can buy off the shelf, which is much better than was available decades ago, and then make the data open and the analysis transparent. And it's the first time that a community of scientists, more than 100 in number, comes together and plans on observing the sky this way. And I should say, you might ask, how come astronomers did not find these objects? They have observatories looking at the sky is not classified. Why didn't they release any data on this? The answer is that if a bird flies above an observatory, the astronomers ignore it. You need really special tracking cameras to follow objects of interest and use artificial intelligence algorithms to figure out what they mean, whether they're a bird, a drone, an airplane, or something else. And it's a completely different set of instruments and software that you need to develop, especially for this purpose. And that was never done before. It's just military personnel. They had the camera on a cockpit of a fighter jet that was very jittery. And that's why the images are not sharp and we can't really tell what was happening. And so, these objects were reported on an anecdotal basis. And the purpose of the Galileo Project is to have, full control over the instrumentation that we put together and understand exactly what it's doing and make it a stable platform, use instruments in the infrared, in the optical, in the radio and audio as well, and record all the information we can. And hopefully, we are taking the road not taken, just like in the poem of Robert Frost. And he said that it made all the difference for him to take that road. For me, the main difference is there may be low-hanging fruit along the road not taken because nobody took that road. And so nobody picked that fruit. And so that's the hope, is that the Galileo Project, as soon as we deploy enough of these telescope systems, will find evidence that is indisputable. And, perhaps it's a mixed bag, that most of the events that were reported, have some mundane explanation. But as I said, it's enough to have one extraterrestrial object for this to make a huge impact on the future of humanity.
All we need is one, Avi. That's absolutely the truth. Again, I'm hoping what you're saying is factual, because again, government might just swoop in and hide it from us. I'm hoping that's not the case. I want it out. Transparency. That's what I hear it. You're saying it, Avi, and I believe you. People don't trust the government thing about giving us everything and this truth in regards to this phenomenon. But you want to make science fiction science fact. And you're getting prepped that there might be something on the horizon once you start completing the Galileo and getting these telescopes out. Do you think we're going to find something sooner than later?
Yeah, I'm very optimistic because this was never done. And the amazing thing is, after I wrote my book, I had a lot of people visit the porch of my home and ask me questions about it. And some multi-billionaires visited as well. And I ended up within a few weeks in June this year with a few $1 million that allow me to establish the Galileo Project. I didn't do any fundraising, and we really need about 100 million in order to accomplish the task. But the reason I'm optimistic is because we have an exceptional team of scientists, and some of them told me that they never had that safe space where they can speak freely about this subject. They really thought about it for many years and wanted to get engaged in such a project. But until I came along and announced the project, they didn't have that opportunity. And I find that very inspirational, because it means that we have the talent, and we also have the enthusiasm of more than 100 scientists. And therefore, if there is low-hanging fruit out there, we will find it. And we are using really instrumentation that should be able to get us data far better than the military personnel. And by the way, Congress mentioned the Galileo Project, again, without any lobbying, in the Gillibrand version of the amendment that by now was adopted in the defense bill. And the government decided to establish an office that will look into the nature of unidentified aerial phenomena. Now, they will use classified data, and we might not hear about the details, but at least it shows that they take it seriously enough to invest funds and personnel in pursuing this question. And it's interesting because the government is a very conservative organization, and you see them taking it seriously before the academic community takes it seriously. So my real hope is that the Gillibrand Amendment will remove the stigma from this subject, and then it will become mainstream also within the academic community. And then the Galileo Project, together with many more people from the academic community, will find evidence in the coming years. And I'm very optimistic about that, because I think one way or another we'll figure out the nature of these unidentified phenomena, as well as objects like Oumuamua. Oumuamua is like a person that you meet on a date, and you think about how unusual that person is, but then by the time you realize it, that person went away. And so we are trying to date the next Oumuamua. And just like in dating, when you try to decide whether to partner with a person for life or to have an offspring, that requires a lot of information. You need to know a lot about this person before committing, because having an offspring requires a lot of investment of your time and effort and so forth. And you need a companion that will have the skills and will have the genetic making that would be appealing to you. And the same is true about an object like Oumuamua. What we need is to collect enough data on the next object that looks weird, so that we are confident that we want to send a spacecraft that will intercept its trajectory, because sending such a spacecraft costs $1 billion. So it's a date that costs $1 billion, and it's a big commitment. And so before we make that commitment, we need to make sure that it looks like Oumuamua and it might be artificial in origin.
Absolutely. Everything you're saying is great, and I like exactly what the Project Galileo is trying to do. Bring great minds from around the world, academia that never really took this kind of subject matter seriously as they would have thought, but now the inspiration behind what you're trying to do is bringing the academia together and trying to ask questions that they've never even thought to ask. But again, you're saying that the government's put money into the UAP thing. I think they put 20 million in over for the past 5 years. That's not much going on there, and they didn't really bring much to the table. I'm expecting more from the Galileo Project. We're going to keep a close eye on what's going on. And one last thing, the UAP office right now, they're not really accepting civilian UFO, which I like to call it, or meta propulsion vehicles is kind of what we call it as well. Would you be, or are you going to be accepting information from the public? We receive a lot of it.
Well, this is a very timely question because today we had established a new subgroup within the Galileo research program that will look into the possibility of collecting data that comes from outside, that is external to the instruments that we assemble. Okay, and that's exactly what you are referring to. And we are developing the ways to collect such data and analyze it. So in fact, we are going in that direction as well. So it's very timely that you asked this question, and hopefully in the coming month or so, we'll come out with recommendations for how to accomplish that. But yes, we will not just rely on the instruments that we are putting together, but also on the public at large. And you can count on us that we will always be open and sincere and straightforward. That's why we don't want to look at classified data, because it would limit our ability to be transparent. And as long as you can see me operating freely, you can count on us telling you the truth. If I disappear one day, then you might worry.
Avi, it's been a pleasure. Appreciate you joining us all the way from opposite sides of the United States, and we're able to do it, get this information out. I think you answered some of our questions, and I know our audience is going to appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you for hosting me. And I should say the story for me started in Hawaii. And so I think that we owe a lot to the observatories in Hawaii for expanding our view of the universe. And hopefully this will be the next Copernican revolution, that we will realize that not only we are not at the center of the universe, but we are also not the smartest kid on our cosmic block.
I want to thank Avi for joining us. And if you appreciated this episode, give it a big thumbs up. Let me tell you, we're asking the big questions and we're getting the answers. This is what Third Phase of Moon's all about. Keep your eyes on the skies, everybody. Blake Cousins. We'll see you next time.